1990, Steve bought the dump at the end of his street. He saw some major flooding in his neighborhood. He then invested more than $100,000 and converted the dump into a lake. But the Corps decided the dump was a wetland and threatened jail time and fines if he did not convert the lake back to its original state. 23 years later, after buying the dump at the end of his street, Steve is on the verge of bankruptcy. What difference does government intrusion make? For Steve and his family, everything.
All right, big government hurts average Americans. That's the simple but direct message from the new Victims of Government project that's launched this week by Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson. The goal? Put a human face on the cost and impact of unnecessary, ineffective, and excessive federal regs. Joining us now is the aforementioned Senator Ron Johnson. Our panel is still here, Jimmy, John, and Betsy. Senator Johnson, how many of those kinds of films do you expect to make, and where will you show them?
Hello, Larry. Well, I'm not quite sure how many we will, but what we want to do is have that be a very regular series. Whether we do it once a month, once a quarter. But my guess is this first series, or this first video, will spark just an avalanche of similar stories, and we'll probably be inundated with different types of stories that we can convey to the American public.
Now, this guy is trying to shift this lake into whatever, some kind of business, I take it, and you're saying that the Wetlands Clean Water Act, that the EPA was on him, ankle biting him every step of the way until he went bankrupt. Is this basically the EPA story?
It was actually the Corps of Army Engineers. They commissioned 8 studies that all said that he should convert that dump into a lake. When he did so, somebody else in the Army Corps said, no, that was a wetland. You got to turn it back into a dump. I mean, this is an unbelievable example of the type of bureaucratic insanity that goes on day after day and affects millions of Americans.
All right, so I was wrong. It's the Army Corps of Engineers. I'm actually quite sorry to hear that. But as you go through this, I mean, I know you're a limited government guy and a deregulator. So far from what you've compiled, where are the big regulatory obstacles?
Well, obviously the EPA is a big problem. But Larry, if you just take a look at current government policy in terms of low interest rates, you have seniors that are victims, people that are, basically on fixed incomes. If they're, turning over a 6% CD, what can they invest in terms of a risk-free type of government, risk-free type of debt investment? Another thing would be socialized medicine. The victims of socialized medicine, we're heading right down that track. So, again, I think there are going to be so many examples of this, and this is just one. This is the very first in a very long series.
Betsy McCoy's got a question.
I heard from another victim of overregulation last weekend. I got an email from a California man named Tom Killian, who works for a county sheriff in California. He was just told that he's going to be pushed down from 40 hours a week to 24 hours a week so that the county sheriff doesn't have to buy him health care. And he went to the sheriff's office and he said, look, I need a full-time job. I'm sending my kids through college. You know what they told him? Go on unemployment. That's government telling him to do that.
Senator Johnson, I'm so interested in this. Are people writing into you, or how are you compiling these stories of excessive regulation?
Well, we just released this on video yesterday. I think initially we had 11,000 views of this. I think this will really explode. And so we're just going to use the social media. We're going to utilize the internet. And hopefully this spreads far and wide, and we'll get, thousands of these types of stories that then we'll compile those things down. We'll find the most powerful examples. Again, put a face on the harm that government actually does real people, real individuals. And, by the way, economic harm. You guys are talking about economic growth. I mean, what Steve wanted to do is he wanted to develop that. He wanted to build homes around that lake. 23 years later, after he's invested $300,000, he's on the verge of bankruptcy, and those developments never happened.
Senator, it's Jimmy Williams. I have a question. Do you think the FDA should regulate baby food?
Listen, we do need regulation. There's no doubt about it. I'm not. I'm not saying that we don't need, the federal government to regulate some of our economy, but we are so overregulated in this country, layer upon layer upon layer, and it does real economic harm, and it harms real people, and that's what we're trying to point out here.
So then maybe a good idea for your segments that you're doing, which I like that you're doing. I think it's great. I think it's good to expose overregulation. Perhaps you should couple that with what the regulators do well.
No, but you know what? The difference is, Jimmy, the climate's changed. What the senator's doing is brilliant because these people are helpless against
what the senator's doing is one-sided. I appreciate
but
it.
you know what? It's the government against the people. And what you got is that poll we were talking about.
The government is the people.
No, 61%. No, they're not. 61% of the people in that survey said they're hurting because of government regulations.
Right.
32% said hurting a lot.
Right.
The balance has gone the wrong way.
That's
the
right.
senator, what he's doing is brilliant.
Senator,
who can help him?
Senator, one of
Listen.
the points, Senator. I mean, I would personally answer Jimmy Williams, who's a pro-business Democrat, basically. There's a big difference between health and safety regulations and economic regulations. And I think in the area of economic regulations, that's where we get into all kinds of trouble and go where the government shouldn't go. I got to get out, Ms. Johnson. As always, we love having you on.